Hi, empaths. Welcome back to my channel and back to Healing Conversations. I am here with Brad Gardner.
Hi.
And Brad is an LA based currently, right? You're currently in Los Angeles. You're a cooking
Yes.
and nutritional coach. But I kind of want to tell the audience how we met. We met years ago, actually, at something called Take the Mic,
Yes.
right? With Marty Gold
10
Cummings.
years, maybe 10 years ago, probably.
Oh yeah, probably a good 10 years.
Longer, who knows?
When you were actually a really successful accompanist in the Broadway community. So we go back a ways, but I'm excited to see what you're into now. Really interested in how you came upon this new lifestyle coaching.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've had, man, I moved to New York, the side of like my creative careers. I moved to New York in 2009, which we would have met very soon after that. And then I spent 10 or 11 years there working as a music director and an accompanist and a pianist and a vocal coach and anything around the piano, music education. And then I think, like a lot of people in 2020, at the time last March, just a little over a year ago, I was on tour with Aladdin as the associate conductor and had this great job. This just like things were just cruising along, and then suddenly that just disappeared. And so when that happened, I felt like I still needed a focus. I still needed an outlet. So I took stock at that time to gauge what direction, what I could do in this moment. And what I realized is over that 10 years in New York and in my creative career, I had been navigating how to eat well, what the best diet to be on was, taking care of my body. And in that, I really loved cooking. So cooking had always been present in my life, and food was such a huge part of my life. So when I suddenly had all this time in the space in 2020, I was trying to figure out how I could enter this world of food and become someone who could start sharing how I was cooking and sharing how I could help people through their nutrition and through whatever I could. And so I got my certification as a nutrition coach within the first 3 or 4 months of the pandemic. And throughout all of that, I also left New York City. I moved to Los Angeles, which was a complete lifestyle adjustment move, meaning I loved the work I could do in New York as an artist, but I did not like living in the city. So I decided to move to a city where I could go hiking more and just be more in touch with nature and sunshine and just like breathe and have space. And
How
so
are you liking it there? Does it
I
feel like a better match?
oh, it's such a, I've never leaving. I mean, I have this, I'll go back to New York for work on occasion, but like, I am here to stay. Like, this is my vibe. It's definitely much
Yeah.
more me. I think nature is such an important component of my life. And I forgot that in New York. And so now I hike as much as I can.
And it's so important for health too.
Yes,
You know?
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's easy. I mean, this is veering away from food a bit, but I think it's so easy when we're in a big city, even LA, that you forget that at one point it didn't look like this. Like it was nature. And something that I'm
Right.
reminded of every weekend when I try to find a new hike, I try to find one that's remote or at least can have a moment where I look around and don't see a city at all. And it's like, wow, we so easily forget that this is what we came from. And I think it's really important to reconnect with that as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like there's so much that we connect with that is healing that we don't even really perceive when we're out in nature, amongst nature. There's rhythms and noises and aromas and things that we're receiving. And indoors, we just don't get that. Or in a big city.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I've become more and more aware of those sensations the more I've spent out in nature. At first it can be a little daunting, a little like, oh God, what? Whoa, this is a little scary how isolating this is. But now I just like crave it and I seek that reconnection. It's almost like in Japan, I think there's a word for it, like there's a specific word that means like forest bathing. And it basically is like
Oh,
a
I love
therapy
that.
to like kind of, it's like going to the spa, you're going for a forest bath. And I like that sentiment.
I love that. I never heard that. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
And of course, food has such a huge impact on our health and well-being and wellness. Finding the right diet for you can be the challenge of life, right? Because so many
absolutely.
people are trying to sell us something around that,
Mhm.
and it can be. I've been exploring that a lot, like what is the human diet, right? But also what is good for me personally too.
Right. Yeah. And I personally, I eat plant-based myself. That is the diet, the way of eating that works for me the best. Um, I know this is controversial to say, but I think I'd like to preface this with, I do not think plant-based is for everyone. And I have to acknowledge that there is a certain degree of privilege that comes from being able to eat plant-based, meaning, it's not, sadly, it's not affordable for a lot of people. I think like the way that I eat and the way that I like to live my life as someone who eats plant-based is sometimes not attainable because of background. So I just want to acknowledge that privilege up front because I think that's something that can easily go ignored. Um, but for me, eating plant-based has been something that I actually initially approached from a dieting perspective early on. I saw one of those documentaries on Netflix that was kind of scaring people into veganism basically. And I went no pun intended, cold turkey vegan. Um, and
What's the
that was
term?
an I went cold turkey vegan,
Oh,
like uh, but I did it for health reasons back. This was in like 2016, 2017. I was on tour with an American in Paris at the time. And I remember specifically being in Des Moines, Iowa, in my hotel room, watching that documentary and deciding that was the moment. And of course, like that was like I kind of went a little too hardcore into it and I fell off the wagon. But I I kept coming back to plant-based because I knew I felt good. And the more I realized I felt good when I was eating that way, I was like, oh, the ethical side of all of it also started to come into my brain of like, oh, this does make sense for the planet in general. It does make sense for just the collective consciousness of just the planet to like be eating as many plants as we can. Anyways, I am getting excited. Um, um, but there's something that now I just feel that when when I am eating vegetables and things that are not highly processed, things that are just really in their truest whole form, I just feel so like I feel confident that I'm like I know what I'm putting in my body, which is something just to speak to like uh it's I feel there's a confidence in knowing that everything I put in my body is wholesome and I could list it, versus
yeah.
like looking at the ingredients on a pack of Cheetos. I'm like, I don't know what's in my body. So there's a confidence that comes from that. And there's also, I don't know, I think it's so exciting what plants have to offer us to eat. And it's something that, because we are such a consumerist culture and everything is a business and every diet is a business, that we can get so lost in just being a consumer that we just forget about how we're fueling ourselves effectively, because we're just chasing to keep up with the Joneses or keep up and stay on top of like what the latest studies telling us is the best thing to do.
Exactly. And the consumerism also keeps us out of balance as far as, you know, when we start thinking in terms of calories instead of nutrients. I think that we get a little out of whack, right? Because we can start thinking, well, if I just binge a huge meal now, I can starve later. And I know I've gotten into that cycle. It's very easy as an actress in New York to just starve yourself and think, hey, I'll make up for it later. And I know that I've been managing that for an unhealthy relationship with food for a very long time. And it didn't start with me. It's in my family, right? It's this legacy burden of how do you manage food? And I've noticed that when we have that not enough syndrome, it lends itself to overeating, overspending, over-consuming in so many areas of life. And so it really is about healthy lifestyle, isn't it? And high quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're speaking to is something that I have recently been latching on to, this idea of restriction. But then when you finally allow yourself to eat something you like, you go out of control because it feels like, oh, I'm never going to be able to eat this again. It's like, I also think there's a similar mindset that comes with cheat meals and cheat days, because you show up to that day and suddenly, just because you have permission, quote unquote, to eat whatever you want that day, you go crazy. And so something I really am intrigued by, and in no way I'm associated with, but there's this whole school of thought of intuitive eating that I think is really interesting, and something that people who are interested in kind of returning to the diet of how, or the way of eating we were born with, it's such an interesting approach to eating to research. Because if you think of it, when we were born, if you think of just having, if you've been around little kids, toddlers, they know when they're done eating. They like, and they almost have to get forced to eat their vegetables, or they might be hungry at a weird time of day. But what that approach, the intuitive eating approach, talks about is, well, yeah, but they're actually in connection with what their body wants. And that's something that our construct of breakfast, lunch, and dinner at 7 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m., we like force humans into this structure that maybe isn't in line with what our body naturally wants. And then we forget how to listen to our body. And so that's something I really think is such a smart way to think about eating, and trying to reconnect with learning our body cues to support ourselves how our body wants to be supported.
Absolutely. Totally. And also considering what might Mother Nature have put out there for us, right? Like, because our diets were kind of put in front of us, right? There were times of fasting that were very natural because there wasn't really a lot of foliage and plants around. So if we think about that in terms of like coming back to nature, like we were talking about in the beginning, it's like when you lose that connection with nature, and kids have a better connection, right? We're kids, I don't know about right now, but when we were children, don't know about you, but I was outside all the time, or maybe I was inside painting, like just using my creative, those creative urges instead of eating to stifle them, right?
Yeah.
And to say, be quiet right now. We don't have time for you. Let's just stuff this down, to actually be using that, and exploring those things.
Yeah. And I think, of course, there's the whole side of like how emotions play into our eating habits as we go through difficult parts of our lives. I think that's a whole different thing to address. Because something, as I've worked as a private nutrition coach, helping people just like get better meals in their kitchen, and as a cooking coach, helping people overhaul their kitchen habits. Something I'm noticing is people who come to me or just to the wellness industry in general, they're coming for their physical health, right? They're coming to lose weight. They're coming to, it's always physically related. And something I always lead with is, yes, health is physical, but health is also mental, health is also emotional, and you can't ignore that. And there is a way to fuel your body that is a balance of physically healthy eating, but it can also be balancing of like emotionally satisfying, mentally satisfying. Those are things that you can't ignore them, because if you're only looking at physical, you're going to get so mentally and emotionally sick by focusing just on the physical side of well-being.
Yeah, and that's why what you're doing is so needed right now, because many of us are feeling starved for human connection, you know, our our life, like the life we had before this distancing and everything that's going on. It's like um and learning the different forms of hunger, right? Like I know that if I'm really thirsty, I might think I'm hungry, right? Or if I haven't had enough variety, because I'm one of those people that I can stick to the same diet and eat the same thing every day for months, like 6 months. And then eventually it's like, I can't sustain that because the body naturally has this need for variety.
Yeah.
So it's like knowing all these hungers as well and how they show up. That's why I also love what you're doing. And I was sort of obsessed, like I watched I was on your Instagram and kind of stalking you a little bit, but I love the whole the idea of like the banana cocoa ice cream.
Yeah. It's
I
so
was in the
easy.
grocery today and I was like, I need to do this.
Yeah.
Like that looks so good.
It's great. It's completely natural. And I mean to lean into the diet industry a little bit, it's low calorie. So like, I'm not about counting calories, but if that's something that's on your awareness of, oh God, is this like out of control? Like it's so good for you, like on all fronts. Yeah, that's one of my, I have that like 3 or 4 times a week.
It's
Yeah,
perfect when you're craving something sweet because we will.
yeah,
That's going to come up, you know?
absolutely. And I think something else to speak to like that childlike creativity that we're all born with, and it's somehow, I think, like you and I in the creative field, like we latch onto it because that's our industry and we are creatives. But often the bigger picture, the bigger society, they lose that connection with their creative self. And something that I am also passionate in all of this plant-based cooking that I'm doing is, how can we access that childlike wonder, whether you're a creative now, an artist now, or not? We were all creative when we were kids. Like that's pretty inarguable. And if we can all figure out how to tap back into that and then go into the kitchen and see it as like a coloring book. Like, I think that's such an exciting and creative way to walk into a kitchen. Now it can be daunting because the kitchen, there's like so many cooking techniques. There's just so, it can be very overwhelming. So my platform as a cooking coach is I'm hoping to help make this more accessible so people can walk in a kitchen and confidently create, confidently color in the coloring book and make a meal just off of their instincts, their creative instincts, and just let go of the pressure of making perfectionism in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
Get creative and embrace what you come up with, because like surely it's going to be edible. Probably like it. And the great thing about plant-based is like you don't have to worry about cooking temperatures or anything. So whatever you cook is going to be safe. At least when I'm cooking, like I don't have to worry about, oh God, the chicken didn't get to 165 degrees or whatever, because just might means a potato is a little bit starchier than it should be.
Right.
So I think like approaching the kitchen with that creative brain is really important to keeping it exciting, and is just a great outlet for my creativity. And I hope to share that enthusiasm and passion with other people um, who are looking to overhaul their cooking and nutrition habits.
Yeah, and everyone can do plant-based at least for a time, right?
Yeah.
Like I know for me personally, I went into a plant-based diet when I was in high school, not for health. Like rarely do we do things for health in high school, but I
Mhm.
saw one of those documentaries, right, where they were showing how animals were being treated. And I think anytime we approach our personal health solely on a moral basis, we're a little out of alignment because it
Mhm.
is physical, um, but it is important to acknowledge um, the impact we're having, right? While still
Yeah,
making sure we feel good.
yeah, and I mean, and that's why I think, you know, it's not, I'm not all about everyone going 100% plant-based. But I will argue that even just increasing the number of plants, increasing the proportion of your intake to having more plants is only going to benefit your health. So whatever step you can take is going to benefit your health. And so I'm happy to meet people where they are or wherever they see their boundary right now is with how far they want to go. If they just want to do like the classic meatless Monday, great. That's an incredible step to take that a lot of people would never do.
Yeah. I know for me personally, um, packing in the nutrients as early as possible in the day by making a giant smoothie that's just full of all kinds of veggies, as well as I like to sweeten it up usually. Usually I want sweeter in the morning. So I will, like, wild blueberries is my go-to. I always have that. But with lots of greens in the morning. And I find that when I just make sure I get as many nutrients in as possible in the morning, there's no real cravings because I've covered the nutrient hunger. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great approach. Um, and I think another way that people forget about getting nutrients and forget about getting different potential health benefits is from, I just put this on my Instagram the other day, so it's very relevant in my brain, is from spices. I think spices in our,
Mm,
especially in American culture, they're so underappreciated. So like adding that cinnamon and adding that powdered ginger and adding like, if you have cardamom, like adding that stuff like around to get like a natural sweetness, but it also just like turmeric, all these little things are just things we aren't widely exposed to in the United States, but are great. They have great potential like anti-inflammatory health benefits and digestive health benefits that are really hard to ignore.
absolutely. That's a really good point. I did see that post where you were saying, like, why do we associate bland with health? It
Mhm.
does not have to be that way, really, truly.
Yeah.
There's so much variety in nature. And if you just go to the supermarket and look at the outskirts of what's available,
Yeah.
there's
Right.
definitely things you haven't tried, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something else that I talk a lot to my clients about is just about walking into the produce section and being less scared by it, like seeing it as an opportunity, like look at all these things I've never cooked with. But like it's just like changing the inflection of that sentence, like look at all these ingredients I've never cooked with versus look at all these ingredients I've never cooked with. How exciting. Like it's just that reframe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when did it really get on your radar, like this whole path of eating? You said that it came up when you were traveling a lot, or
Yeah, I was raised in the South. I was raised on a lot of fast food. So I was raised, and if I had a vegetable in the South, it was stewed in a sauce or stewed in a pot for hours and hours, or it was deep fried. So I didn't have like the greatest perspective then. But then in moving to New York, like, well, college first, and then moving to New York, I started realizing like I was like 60 pounds overweight when I graduated high school and went into college. And I knew that, and I just really knew I had to get it in control. And so I started just trying to eat healthier, but doing all like the classic ways of just like, run a lot, cut calories. But then at the same time, like I was born and raised around really good food. And so I was like, also loved getting to know New York through, all the standard New York foods, right? Like there's still like a
Yeah.
special place in my heart for a New York City bagel that you can't get here. And that makes me really sad. Um, and so I eventually, like throughout my 20s, like I traveled so much. I traveled like, all over the country with national tours. And I went to Japan, and I've been to India, and I've been to all these places that are really cool. And the way I love getting to know them is through the flavors. And it just seemed so counterintuitive that I had to feel guilty for enjoying these things. And so that's when I started realizing that health is so much more than just like it's healthy for my body physically. Like there's so much more to life with health. And so that's why now I'm looking for that balance and trying to guide people and help people achieve that balance of living life, enjoying life through food, because it's such a through line for anybody, right? It's through line of any big event, a wedding, it's through, just any major event in life, food is there. It's there is a celebration, it's there as a comfort, it's there. And we can't ignore that. And the more we see that as like, oh, I'm gonna feel so guilty after all this. Oh, this is gonna make me feel guilty. Like that just hurts our mental health. So
Yeah.
why not find how to enjoy food, fuel our body well, and really just like it's a paradigm shift of how we're thinking about our approach to eating.
Yeah. And as you were saying earlier, it is about mental health. It is about emotional well-being and stress management, because it's so easy to like, I think particularly for women, like hormonally, I know stress is such an impact on my body
Yeah,
in a way that's just crazy. And I guess maybe it depends on the individual as well, like how susceptible you are to cortisol and all of that stuff. But um, I know that bad nutrition or bad foods make it worse. Definitely make it
absolutely.
worse.
Yeah, and there's a book that I was just seeing if I could. Oh, there is an author. I have not read her book, but it's actually on my list. Her name's Alyssa Vetty. And she has, I think one book is called In the Flow, and the other book is called Woman Code. But it speaks to the needs of of women throughout each week of the month, and how important it is to acknowledge that and your body with that support your body with good food and good nutrition depending where you are. I'm not, I've not read the book, but it was put on my radar as something like I'm really curious to read more and to maybe be able to support people through, because like you say, I think that's something that it can be so easily ignored, and it there's so much more for anybody with like our bodies to be aware of, and how we fuel our body through any sort of stressful period in our life, through any sort of big shift in our life, really anything. And there's better ways we can be supporting ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something I definitely um, started to realize when I really started to look at how I was using food and where I would come out of alignment, it was definitely related to not being creative, right? Kind of trying to stuff that, and boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
boundaries with others, and feeling out of control in that way. Like I couldn't say no, or I didn't have the sovereignty or something. Just feeling that out of control feeling. Um, I would make very bad decisions from that place. So I
Yeah,
think it is inner work,
it is.
Do you
Yeah.
find that that comes up a lot when you're working with people?
Yeah, and I'm not a psychologist, like I'm not any of that, but I do highly stand by like a lot of introspection, connection with nature. Um, I'm someone, I journal. I do my morning pages every day. I do my my 3 pages of journaling. I swear by it. Like it's such sets my day off right. And so I think all of this has to come from a place of being attuned with what you need, and that's not going to be an overnight switch. It's a discovery. It's an ongoing process of learning who you are, identifying where you came from, fully acknowledging that, and then working with that person that you have developed to become, not ignoring where you've come from.
I love that. I feel like we could talk all day. Like I just want
I
to
know.
keep going. I just want to keep hear what you have to say about everything. So there might be a need to be a part two, but I don't want this to cut off on us before we find out, before you tell the viewers where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. Brad K. Gardner is my name. You can also find me. I have a website, eatwithbrad.com. So those are the two best ways to reach me. I do show up mostly on Instagram with all my recipes, but I also do then have a resource on my website that that I have like a complete log and a complete navigation page for all the recipes I've made and shared in the past. And then the other thing is every Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern time and 5 o'clock Pacific, I do an hour-long free cooking class that is listed. I usually host it on Zoom. It's absolutely free. I let people show up to cook along with me, just to watch and ask questions. Really, it's just an open platform for me to get to know people in the community, and there's no pressure around it. It's just I'm in my kitchen cooking dinner, and I like welcoming people in. So I do that every Thursday, and I always make it very clear every week to put that on Instagram. So that's another great platform for people to reach me.
I love that. I will link all of that in the description of this video as well, so people can find it and just give it a click.
Right.
And is there any last thoughts you want to say to the viewers about their journey here?
I think eat more plants. Even don't have to go. You don't have to go full tilt vegetarian, vegan. Just eat more plants.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, Brad. That was so much fun.
Thanks,
And
Rachel.
I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you guys. Thanks for liking and subscribing, and follow Brad on all of his platforms, and we'll talk again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brad. I'll see you the next time.
All right.